All right, good morning, everyone. I'm going to just do a real quick video on the lesson for this week. 3.2, how did the role of the police evolve in the 20th century? So hopefully the examples I give here will be helpful. I'm not going to give a ton, but I do want to just show you kind of what the expectation is. So if you go to assignments, unit 3, what does good authority look like? And then this 3.2 was the how did the role of police evolve in the 20th century? There's two documents to open. One's a Google Doc, one's a Google Slide. Excuse me. I'll let those open. You can see all my tabs about the election right now. Well, these are taking forever to open, aren't they? So the first thing I want to point out is that this Google Slide you cannot edit. It is just for everyone to look at. Then the Google Doc is where you're going to be doing your work and turning that in. How did the role of the police evolve in the 20th century? And just the first bit of clarification, 20th century, that is the 1900s, 1900 to 1999, that was the 20th century. We're currently in the 21st century. So when we're talking about the 20th century, that was the 1900s, just a big reminder. And we're just going to look at this history of what the police were like in 1900 and how that changed all the way up until the 1980s, 1990s. And then the next, where we're going to go with the next unit is in the last 20 years, how has the role of the police further changed? Because it's changed significantly in the last 20 years, and even since you all have been alive. So what we're going to look at, how did slave patrols use authority in the U.S. South? Because that was a big deal even in the early 1900s. How did companies use authority of the police? That's how businesses use the police to protect their interests. And then how were African Americans affected by the authority of the police? Again, authority, that's just the ability to kind of tell people what to do and to make and enforce rules. So that's authority. So just a couple things. We're looking at the original police they were called slave patrols. And their job was just to make sure that there weren't enslaved persons walking around without permission. And so really what we're doing is this is going to be different because you're just doing observations and questions. You're not answering questions, you're asking questions. And so for here, you're going to do slides 1, 2, 3, and 4. Or really 2, 3, and 4. How did slave patrols use authority in the U.S. South? And this is going to just be an overview of just slave codes, laws relating to slavery and enslaved people, specifically regarding the Atlantic slave trade and cattle slavery in the Americas. That's just the type of slavery we had. Most slave codes were concerned with the rights and duties of free people in regards to enslaved people. So for example, it was illegal for free people to teach enslaved people to read or write. It was completely illegal. Illegal to teach enslaved persons to read or write. That's why when they were finally free, there were so few who could read or write. A slave couldn't accuse a white person of anything, no testimony. So you couldn't say this person committed a crime if you were an enslaved person. And then they weren't allowed to assemble without the presence of a white person. So the slaves couldn't gather in large groups unless there was a white person present. So here you would just make observations. And for example, you could just say, seems like there are laws preventing from learning and gathering. So you couldn't read or write and you couldn't gather. And the question is you might just say why didn't people want enslaved persons to read and write? That's a question you could put. And you can put that one down. I'm fine with that. So that's the types of things. One thing that I'm really going to focus on is, as you go through this stuff, I don't want your observation, excuse me, your observation is not going to be to do this, because this is not an observation. I will say it. If you just do that, I will not give you credit. And that's the meanest thing I'll say on this video. But just make sure, just something like this, your observation, one sentence of what you're getting from this, and then go to the next slide. What was the purpose of slave patrols? And this is just a quote. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of the way slave patrols function is that they were explicit and they're designed to empower the entire white population. So explicit means like it was very just like in your face. It was like very obvious. And so it's basically saying like, not just with police power, but the duty to police the comings and goings and movements of Black people. So again, another observation, and you don't necessarily have to have one for each slide, but just of the overall, because like this section is going to be slides 1, 2, 3. You need to put slide 4 also, and 4. So you can even put like laws were very obvious. Obviously trying to make enslaved life much harder, or something like that. And then you just go on to the next one. It's just another quote. And then just so for each slide, just like have an observation, and maybe for every other slide have a question. And then same deal. Then this middle column, slides 5, 6, and 7. So this is about how like companies, how businesses basically took advantage of the police to, like, for example, like if there was a strike, and a strike is like when the workers say, we're not going to work until you treat us better, give us more money, give us more rights. So like companies would use, like they would hire police forces to come in and like threaten people who were on strike, and like commit acts of violence. And so slides 5, 6, and 7 is just all about that. So again, maybe for every slide, just an observation, just something you see, something you notice, and then maybe a question, something you wonder. And again, the question can be as simple like, why didn't people enslave persons to read or write? Why were police willing to be violent against people on strike? And again, to be on strike means that you're not, if you work for a company, you refuse to work until you get better rights. That's like what a teacher strike would be. Teachers saying, we're not going to teach until you give us, more pay, more benefits, better, treat us better. That happens. And so that's for 5, 6, and 7. Then you're just going to do the exact same thing for 8, 9, and 10. And again, this is just how African Americans were affected by the authority of the police in the 20th century. So again, from the pictures, from the quotes, just an observation, a question maybe from each slide. And that's all you're doing with that. And then just some reflection questions down here. Again, just asking for specific examples and evidence from the slides that you look at. So that's pretty much all you've got to do. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out, let me know, and enjoy.